Welcome everyone to another meetup of Data on Kubernetes. I've been talking to different people now, and this is meetup number 40 something in English, but now we have moved on to other languages such as Spanish, Portuguese, and we have our first meetup in Hindi. That'll be on Friday. So between now and Friday, I have to learn how to say, hi, my name is Bart, and I don't speak Hindi. Vijay, maybe you can help me with that later. Another couple of announcements before we get started, though. Gorka, can you share our screen and show the website? If you haven't seen already, you're going to hear about it now. We will be hosting a co-located event in KubeCon next week on May 3rd. It is 100% free. It starts at 10 o'clock in the morning at CEST European time and goes until 5 p.m. European time. We will have about 15 different talks from different companies and also end users. Even going to be adding some new talks this week, a couple more because we've got a little bit more space that we want to get in there. So if you want to sign up for the event, if you already signed up for KubeCon, registration is 100% free. You can get all the information there from the CNCF website. Big shout out to all of our friends in the CNCF who have been helping us out with preparing the event. The numbers look really good. We've already got 2,000 people signed up. So very, very nice response to see that so many folks are interested. We're also going to be putting everything on YouTube, so everyone will be able to see everything in the following days. If you want to check out the schedule, thank you, Gorka. You can just go to our website, DoK Community, and you'll see all the talks, exactly what times they're going to be there. Also registration, access from there too, so you can get on there and check everything out. But like I said, we've got a really, really nice lineup of a lot of different perspectives. The idea is to make it more comfortable to have conversations about data on Kubernetes, the exact thing we've been doing with all the meetups that we've been having, all the different opinions we've been hearing from folks out there, their experiences, their use cases. And very excited to be with our wonderful guest today, Vijay, who has a very interesting curriculum, not just limited to technical stuff. As we can see behind him, there are a couple of keyboards and a recording booth. So we're definitely going to be talking about music. But first of all, Vijay, can you just introduce yourself? Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. Another quick message before we get started. All the love in the world, positive energy and thoughts are with all the wonderful people in India. We are with you. This is a global thing we're facing together. We are 100% with you. We don't want anyone to feel behind. Like I said, this is a global community. We got a lot of friends in India in our community. So big shout out, lots of love and energy and support to everybody there. But Vijay, that being said, very, very welcome to have you here. Very happy to have you. Can you just introduce yourself, your background?
Sure.
Who are you? And what are we going to be talking about today?
Okay. First of all, thanks, Bart, and thanks for reaching out to me. I think this is a great opportunity. This is something that I always wanted to do, to talk to the community and share whatever little I know about what is happening and what I have been working on. I'm AB. My full name is AB Vijay Kumar. You don't want to know what is the full form of A and B, right? So it becomes
I do. Well, you can't say that and then not say it. Yeah, what is it?
Yeah. It's actually Anantapur Bache Vijay Kumar. So in India, what we do is we have a family name and then we have the real name, right? So it's AB is more of a family name. All my brothers, my father, everybody has that in the beginning. Yeah. I've been with IBM for 23 years now already. IBM is my first job. I joined IBM as a Java developer. That's when Java was just picking up, and since then I have focused to be in the technical line, right? So I have grown maybe every step of the ladder in the technical career path in IBM. I'm an IBM Distinguished Engineer now. I'm the CTO for Hybrid Cloud Management, which is the largest unit, which almost is 60% of or 50% of the GBS IBM services business, right? So which involves building all of this, AI ops, data ops, DevSecOps, coming up with the next generation of ways of doing, management on the cloud, right? So how do you do hybrid cloud management, multi-cloud management, all those spaces, right? So I'm responsible for defining the technical strategy. I'm also a master inventor. I have around 31 issued patents and around 30 in the pipe. So it's around 60 filed.
Okay. Just like you, if you tell me what your name is AB, and then you won't tell me, you've got over 30 patents already registered and 30 more in the pipeline. Can you just give us a little bit of insight? What are those patents about, if you can share that information? And B, where do you get the time to do all this stuff?
Most of my patents are. I worked before this hybrid cloud. I was the CTO for Apple IBM partnership. There's a lot of AI that we did along with mobile, AR, VR kind of stuff, right? And then some of them are on drones and soft robotics. How do you apply soft robotics for disaster management and things like that? Some of them are in blockchain, and a lot of them are on cloud. You can find it on Google. All 30 patents are there, issued on Google. I mean, the ones which are patent pending, you may not find it, right? So,
yeah. I'm just curious, does anybody else in the audience have a patent? But also, I'm just curious as well, too, are your patents registered? First, you register them in India? Because I know the intellectual property is complicated. Yeah,
it's normally in US because IBM is headquarters is in US. Yeah, but some of the ideas they actually patent it in other offices. Like there are a couple which got patent. Which got filed also in China, right? So,
okay, yeah.
Anyway,
so that can always be a thing. Is depending on what you discover, and the other ones that are on the way, are they also related to?
Most of them
artificial intelligence, AR, VR, stuff like that.
Yeah, most of them are in that area, right? So, gaming, I have 3 in VR gaming. So, it's crazy. I'm a big gamer, right? So. While I play a game, I get some ideas and I just package it and put it. Anyway,
this is amazing.
Yeah, that's
all right. Can we go off on a little bit of a tangent then? What are your favorite video games?
Right now, my favorite is this Ghost of Tsushima. So I just finished it once, and I just bought my PS5, so I want to play it again in PS5, but not getting time. So I just installed it, but I finished in PS4.
Okay. All right. Very, very good. Anyway, so we got plenty of different things that we can talk about. Now, can you tell me when was your first experience with Kubernetes?
I have heard of this first time when I was curious to know how the hell Google does this, right? So many searches, how are they even thinking of a data center that can handle this kind of a load, right? And I think I watched some YouTube video of somebody actually talking about, was it a YouTube video or somewhere, right? I saw one video which was talking about how they manage these workloads. And that's the first time I heard, it was not called Kubernetes, it was called something else that time, right?
Borg,
Yeah, Borg, correct, exactly. Yeah. And then 2015, 2016 is when I really wanted to try this out, and that time it was not that sophisticated. It was a pain to get it working on my machine, right? But yeah, I would say around 2015 is when I really got interested into this whole thing. Yeah.
Okay, and I think at that point in time as well, I would also like to know in your experience, because I think you may have already mentioned this. Starting to work on multi-cloud, what was the first time that you heard about that? Because a big part about Kubernetes, avoiding vendor lock-in, and particularly working for IBM that has a cloud. Interesting to be in a space where it's sort of reconciling those differences, negotiating between one another, giving users the freedom of choice, things of that sort. What was that like?
I think multi-cloud. When I started Kubernetes, my focus was more on how do you move of VM and have a thinner way of doing things. Then the microservices revolution started, and we were trying to build containers and microservices and all that. I think the multi-cloud hit me when I started learning OpenShift, really, right? So that's the first time when it hit me. Of course, then I went back and said, what, OpenShift is Kubernetes end of the day, right? So Yeah, when I saw when IBM was negotiating on this, I was just trying around with OpenShift, and then I realized the OpenShift is available as a managed service on pretty much all the hyperscalers, right? So that's when I thought, oh, okay, this makes a lot of sense, right? So, and then we were thinking of multi-cluster deployments, multi-region, multi-cloud deployments. How do you have a single control plane to manage clusters that's across? I would say last 2 3 years I've been exploring in that area, and the IBM satellite, which we recently launched, and Anthos, all these things, right? So kind of made it much more exciting, I think, right? KubeFed, for example, right? So
Okay. All right. Now specifically more jumping into the topic of today, what was the first time you heard about DataOps?
oh, pretty early in my career, actually. We never used to call it data ops then, but
Oh,
we were,
okay.
yeah, we did have pipelines. We were actually one of the first times I worked with a large retail company. I'm sorry, I cannot take client names. I don't
No,
have
that's
clearance,
okay.
but
That's
yeah,
okay.
it's a large retail company who have these shopping malls, right? And they were basically having this issue of data coming from sensors. This is like 6 or 7 years back, maybe. Yeah, sensor feeding all the information about who is buying what. Then you have the credit card transactions feeding in, and then you have the inventory information, what is in stock, what is in the transit, and things like that. Right. So there is like this real-time data, and the retail company really had a challenge in terms of silos of applications, silos of data, right? And the biggest problem was there's a lot of junk in the data, right? So they didn't have a process of actually keeping the data clean, right? And it was more of a data quality issue, right? If you compare that to the today's terminology of data ops, right? So there was no data platform strategy. It was all, whoever liked whatever database they used to buy. They had like DB2, they had pretty much all the flavors of Oracle and MySQL around, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so there was no concept of, and if you have to do analytics, it would take 3 to 6 months. Unbelievable, right? So if I have to know what is the pattern that I need to do, I need to do a OLTP to OLAP ETL, right? And then I use data mining and stuff to really look at what are the patterns of buying of people, what should we order, pre-order, and things like that. So that's when we started thinking of the stream analytics. How do you create a pipeline as the data gets into the database? How do you start thinking of data lake kind of a solution where when the data comes into the lake, how do you make sure the data is clean and uh, really your question on Slack, right? Enriched, right? So is it
Yeah.
making sense, or is it only sensible data should come into the lake so that when I do analytics, I have, and of course, there is a lot of compliance regulations, and we'll talk about it. I think we have 1 hour to go, right? Um, so that's when it hit me that you need a similar structure like how we do code management, right, from DevOps. You need data management in similar way. So in code, we are so good in GitOps and DevOps, where you check in the code gets validated, it goes from one environment to other environment, finally it goes to the production, right? It is all like very, very well streamlined, but that is only the compute, right? What about data? When some data comes in, am I following similar things? And when even the development and operations were like two big teams, right? So the people who build the data is one team. I mean, building the schema and all that stuff, right? And then there is another team who is managing this data. Then there is another team which is basically extracting this data into an OLAP and trying to do analytics. It doesn't make sense, right? So, I mean, the same principles we are applied in code can be applied here. And that's the whole concept of data ops, where you have an integrated squad sitting together, all of them talking about, how do you integrate, how do you think of microservices? We moved from monolith to microservices. Similarly, how can I break down my monolith database into more, I wouldn't say micro databases, but more like domain-driven, domain-specific databases, right? And then how these domain-specific databases bring data into one place for me to do the analytics. So that's the whole idea of the data ops, I would say.
All right, very, very good. But as you said, and I think this happens a lot of times, it's like, was it something that was being done previously just with a different name? But like you said, I think a lot of it's, opening your eyes to, the same principles that are used here for coding can also be used in other areas.
Exactly.
So that you don't need to reinvent the wheel, and that you see the logic behind that, and then infusing those things together. All right. So with that, what would you say about the tooling that needs to go into all this, or at least in your experience?
Yeah, so there are various types of toolings, right? I mean, it's a pipeline, end of the day. It's like the same problem. One is, it is a polyglot, right? When I say polyglot, you have, first of all, structured, non-structured data. Within that, you have various flavors of tools and platforms that store all of these data, right? Now, you cannot say, hey guys, throw away whatever technology you have, tools you have, let's all move to one data platform. It doesn't make sense. So the tool ecosystem of data pretty much stays as it is, but the DataOps platform on top of it kind of brings all these pieces together, right? So it's not like I live with what tools I have, right? If you compare this with the code, right? You still have Java, you still have C, you still have C++, you still have mainframe, but I can still have a DevOps pipeline which gets all the code integrated and deployed, right? So, but here it's much more than integrating and deploying, but also making sense of it, cleansing the data, making sense of the data, and how do you enforce compliance? How do you enforce global consumption? There could be masking, for example. How do you build a metadata model out of it? So the underlying technologies will continue to be there, like DB2, Oracle, MySQL, even IMS, for example. There are clients where I'm still going back to legacy IMS kicks transactions, right? I still keep it there, but how do you have one platform? So there is Data Kitchen, there is Cloud Pak for Data, which is our IBM product, and then we have Snowflake is very widely looked at as one of the tools, right? But Data Kitchen, I think, is much more in line with a lot of these concepts, right? Yeah, I mean, each of these clients, even AWS platform, have their own point of view. Even the cloud platforms are coming up with their own data ops tool set, right? But most of the times I hear a lot of Snowflake. I hear a lot of Data Kitchen.
Okay. Yeah. Snowflake does seem to be quite, hot topic in terms of tooling. Yeah. All right. Now, if someone wants to get involved in DataOps, what would you say, like, before you start, you should probably, let's think about resources. Let's think about mistakes that you may have seen. Let's think about maybe, stuff that you want to avoid, best practices. What would you recommend?
See, I think data is not like code, right? I mean, code is something that you can learn a programming language. If you have some logic, you can start writing the code, right? When you get into DataOps, one of the key aspects of DataOps is the domain knowledge, right? So you need to know what is the data that you're handling. It's not like you take one technology, apply it, and it'll start working, right? It makes sense maybe at a lower maturity level of DataOps where you are just automating things. You're just writing an ETL, hey, transform this to this kind of a thing, is a pure technical play. But as you get into the maturity steps towards more and more mature DataOps, you're talking more and more about domain, right? So you need to understand how this is information about a product. This is information about a order, right? Now, unless you have the knowledge of domain, you cannot do domain specific decomposition of data, right? And you cannot write algorithms which will cleanse the data. You need to know what is good data, what is bad data, right? You need to know how you take this data.
Can we just unpack that a little bit? What's your definition of bad data?
See, bad data there are various definitions of that, right? So one is the validity of the data, right? So when you look at the transactional systems, you have a lot of data which is not valid anymore, right? So though it is good data, but it is not useful for me to do analytics. The second is data which may not help me in coming up with any analytics or deriving at a KPI that I'm looking for, right? So it is like you always go for find data which you're looking for. It's not like there's at a particular for a particular KPI, this data may be bad. I mean, this data may not be useful, but for a different KPI, this data is still useful. You get what I'm saying?
I know. I think it's a really good point. And that's what a lot of this comes down to is like, before you start touching any technologies, first of all, like you said, what are your KPIs? What's the outcome that's desired here? Like
exactly.
So depending on the use case, then one thing might seem good and another thing might seem bad. So I understand what you, and so that's why maybe it's even sometimes a little bit dangerous to say good or bad.
Yeah.
But it's appropriate based on those KPIs.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I said that it's not a technical play. It's more of a business play, because you need to understand the business in which when your client comes and says, hey, I want to increase my, let's say, increase my throughput of, or I want to make my supply chain optimized, right? So there are at least like, I would think of 10 to 12 domains that will come together if you want to optimize the supply chain, data domains. Now that 10 domains might boil down into around 20 to 25 data sources that you might have, right? Which might boil down to at least, hundreds of data elements that you're talking about. So it goes more top down when you go into a mature data ops, right? So you need to answer your question. I know it's a very long answer, but
no, but
to
it's
answer
a good
your
one.
question, so the data engineers, it's much more easier for data engineers, data scientists to embrace data ops rather than a DevOps engineer trying to become a data engineer, unless he or she has that complete understanding of the particular domain, right? So that's what I feel. I could be wrong, but yeah.
No, but I think it's a good point. And to unpack that a little bit further, as a CTO, you're, I would imagine, constantly balancing tech and business, right? So in this particular situation as well, we talk a lot about the community, and we try to think about, all right, it's wonderful to talk about this or about that, but if someone isn't willing to pay for it, then, I mean, it's still an interesting technology, but in terms of its practical value, and actually, and this isn't just to promote our event next week, but one of the talks that we're going to be having next week is, how to sell cloud native internally. And so whether it's Kubernetes, whether it's this, whether it's that, how do you convince somebody in a simplified enough way that, like, we really need this, our customers, there's going to be a demand for it, maybe not now, but we need to start thinking about it, and which is one of the very reasons why we have a lot of these conversations, is because we are convinced that, there's a strong shift that's going to be coming in the market towards stateful workloads on Kubernetes, all the things that relate to storage, operators, data streaming applications, you name it. So in your case, in 2021, where we're at right now, how do you see data as a business, where the money is, what your customers are asking for? What's your take on that?
See, I see a sudden spike on this, because now I think most of the enterprises are very matured in terms of the applications that they have developed, right? So you take any area, like, everybody pretty much talks about, hey, online check-in, pretty much, everybody has the most good looking websites or portals, right? Where you can go browse a product catalog and buy the product, right? That's not a differentiator anymore. The user experience is, of course, is given now. Nobody wants a boring experience on things. Now, the user experience, now the next step of user experience can only be enhanced by bringing in a lot of machine learning and AI, right? Where I understand your behavior, I understand or predict or preempt what is that you're looking for, right? Within the limits of the privacy norms, right? Which is very, very critical, right? Now, that is only possible if you have all the data in your backend in a particular disciplined way, right? So you can't expect a machine learning or an AI if you have a totally messed up data platform, right? So the data platform engineering is one of the key things all of the clients I discuss with are keeping some money for that, right? So the data platform engineering, data ops is one piece of the puzzle in data, big piece of the puzzle of the data platform engineering. But pretty much, what is my data? Where am I putting what data? What is the data that I want to use for what kind of analytics? First, asking the question, saying, where do I want to take the business? Because the data, like I said previously, right? First, if I understand what is my performance indicator that I want to track, what is my SLO, SLA that I want to track in terms of how I want to perform in the market, that will derive what kind of data I need to keep for doing my analytics, right? So now the differentiation that every enterprise is looking for will only come if they keep the data as the key resource, right? So it's become like a key resource, right? Now there's a lot of investment. That's why you all of a sudden see there is a lot of hype around data scientists, pretty much everywhere, right? So Python, R has become like the most critical skill, right? That's mainly because of that. And the beauty there is Kubernetes solves the bigger puzzle of, because running Python R workloads, right, on an on-prem system with a lot of data is not that easy, right? So you need a cloud to run these kind of, you need a high performance cloud, you need a high compute, right? You need a way to elastically scale it up and scale it down. It's not like, hey, I am doing, let's say it's Diwali time or a Christmas time, I want to run a lot of workloads on analytics, right? It's not like I can buy 100 machines in my data center just for that event, right? Instead, I can run it on cloud. Now, is VM a good option or a container a good option to run it? Obviously, the container, because I can do more with less resources, right? So then if I do it in the container, what is the best way to do that is Kubernetes, right? So that's why I think Kubernetes, technologies around Kubernetes like OpenShift, all of them become very, very critical to run these machine learning and AI workloads, right? So that way, the data ops that we are building is more and more cloud native. It is becoming more and more cloud native, right? So the pipelines that we build, the cleansing that we do with the data, all those things, right? So.
Okay. And with that in mind as well, too, because like you said, like we can say the answers or solutions that Kubernetes provides based on certain problems. When it comes to the element of, which is what our community is about, of data on Kubernetes, what do you think are the primary challenges there, or sort of pain points that might prevent some clients that you might have at an enterprise level from saying like, hey, maybe we're not ready for it yet. That some people are just a little bit hesitant. This seems like a very strong technology that perhaps we don't need, which is why in many cases it seems that, and you could probably answer this better than me, that OpenShift seems like a more out of the box plug and play solution. Yeah. But then also we've had plenty of conversations with lots of different folks, like, day one, day two Kubernetes, how can you make it simpler for your developers so that they don't, whether it's security risks or cost control or lots of different things there. Like I said, particularly from the data questions related to working with Kubernetes, what are the obstacles that you think a lot of that, like I said, that customers are facing that might seem like a bit of a turnoff?
See, one definite, I think, scalability definitely is an advantage. Elasticity is definitely an advantage. I think we can talk about that. But the biggest challenge is the experience of developers, like you rightly pointed out, right? And doing it yourself with Kubernetes is a technical play, right? Is a highly technical play. You need to understand a lot about things like, how do you write YAMLs? What is a deployment? What is a persistent volume claim, and things like that, and make sure it's all coming together. That is one of the biggest pains that we have, because most of the data scientists don't care about these things, right? So they are more into the domain, right? So that's
it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, exactly. The other very important point is the transaction management that we do, right? So as we get more and more into a distributed data micro databases that we talk about, right? So it was relatively easy for you to manage your transactions when it is a monolith database. But when you go into this kind of a model, the transaction management, the transaction traceability becomes very critical, right? So how do you plan your read, write, and read only databases becomes very critical there. So this is a totally shift in the paradigm of the way we do data architectures, really, right? So if a traditional guy who has done this data architectures and who has done the schemas and all that stuff, you bring him now and say, hey, here is the Kubernetes architecture. Now build a micro database architecture. Uh, he or she has to unlearn a lot of things and relearn a lot of things, like in terms of how you think in a structured and unstructured database with a distributed database. How do you do transactioning? How do you trace the database? How do you perform your audits, data audits, which is very, very critical? How do you ensure the data privacy is all in place, right? So all of these layers become the Uber layers for your Kubernetes cluster, which is running your database, right? So that's why most of the clients are moving towards something like Data Kitchen, Snowflake, or Cloudpack, pre-packaged or opinionated solutions like that, is because of that, because they provide that for you, right? And then you just need to focus on your data sources and build machine learning algorithms on top of it.
Yep. Relates to that as well, is that because you're mentioning, either could be on the technical side or on the client side, issue of a traditional mindset. As someone who's worked in IBM, for over 20 years, you've seen probably more than a couple of cultural changes, and a lot of what it comes along with
Yeah.
Kubernetes and data. Yeah, you see, and then we can relate this to a lot of different things. We can relate this to the evolution of music. I mean, anyway, lots of different things change over time. And in other organizations, they're very resistant towards change. I don't want to do this. I don't want to break the monolith. Also, you have people in very, very high positions that are going to retire in 5 years, and they're like, I don't want to be, spearheading a bunch of headaches. Yeah. So sometimes it's, as much as we talk about technology, there are always cultural factors and human factors that have a role to play there. So when we, like I said, if we're talking about a data on Kubernetes culture, a data on Kubernetes mindset, how do you create that? How do you build that? How do you get the right pieces in place? Even cloud native causes a lot of headaches because some folks aren't ready for that. How have you experienced that in IBM? What advice might you give to other companies about how to approach that? And like I said, particularly if we're thinking about cloud native, Kubernetes native way of thinking, multi-cloud, et cetera, et cetera.
So there are only, change is definitely going to happen, right? So there are only two ways you can embrace it. Either you get hit and then you learn and change, or you change before you get hit, right? So it depends what you want to do. But like I said, I had to unlearn a lot of things before. I would have at least gone through. I know I'll sound very old now all of a sudden, but I would have seen at least 4 or 5 generations of the way we used to do things, right? So we used to build systems which are stable. Now we are building systems which embrace change. We used to think waterfall. Now we are thinking agile. Right. So similarly, dev was a separate team, ops was a separate team. Now we are saying it's an integrated squad. So the recommendation I have is basically you have to move with where the market is going, right? So the clients are very, very smart now. It's not like a client will come to you now and say, hey, I have this business problem. I don't care what technology you apply. I'll take it as long as it works for me, right? The client is very smart. The client knows what he's asking. So they have their own technology strategy. So you start aligning to what they are looking at, and you have to work on top of it. So when the recent clients I go, the CTOs, I interact with the client level. They know much better than what I would know on some of the topics, right? So you have to keep up to pace with those things. Otherwise, you lose out on this, right? So I don't know if I answered the question that you asked.
But you are, and also as well too is that like, I think it's a classic problem, and also once again as a CTO, bridging the gap between tech and business. How can you make sure that every technical person has somewhat of a business mindset, and that every business person, I think that's tricky because, like you said, is that the client has the final say. They also know their target, like they have their own objective sources, stress, pressure. And so there's even political things that get involved in this at a certain point. But I'm just saying, I think this is something that's useful for all people in the community is like, what are, basic business concepts that every technical person should understand no matter what? What would you say? Or ones that you see that they frequently don't know?
I think first, I think is to understand what is the benefit of the solution that I'm putting for the client, right? The business benefit. Technical people have this craving to bring in the best that they know, or the experimental mind is what we have as technical guys. So we want to use the most shiny object that I can see in the market, right? But does it make sense for the client? Is it going to bring in a benefit for the client, right? So that kind of thinking itself will tone down a lot of thinking in terms of that's the first step towards stop thinking technical, start thinking what client wants, start thinking what the impact. Second important point is I do a lot of reading on business, not just the technology, right? So I also attend some of the boring business conferences where I might fall asleep, but I'll still try to grab when they say supply chain, what are the high level challenges in supply chain? What are the solutions that you have in the market which are related to supply? I never try to be an expert in all the business domains, but at least when a client is using those business terminology, at least I need to make sense of it and should be able to say back something, at least survive the first level of conversation before I come out of the room, right? That level of knowledge is very important for the technical guys. And it's a must have, right? Unless you are sitting in a research organization, where you don't really worry about the business side, but you're writing algorithms after algorithms kind of a work, right? But for services business, it's definitely a must.
And I think part of it as well too, like you were saying, is that I think at the root of all that, there's just a need for curiosity. Like if you're not willing to spend, it doesn't mean you have to spend 10 hours a day reading the Wall Street Journal or Financial Times or things like that, but just something, like go outside your comfort zone, see what's going on. You don't have to agree with everything. You don't have to like it, but it's a reality that's going to be there. And as you said, as well as that on the technological side, there's a certain trend that you said, the shiniest with bells and whistles, but you can't oblige your client to use a technology if they feel that it's not resolving their problems. Now going back to DataOps, all right. So we have DevOps engineers, now we have, DevSecOps, we have all these different things. Do you imagine that this will become its own, or it is becoming its own category of I am a DataOps engineer, as opposed to other disciplines?
Very much. It's a most demanding. See, there is the site reliability engineering is one. So let me go through the various flavors of these engineers, right?
Perfect.
So the spectrum starts, let me take it to the most ops side of it. The most ops side of it are the site reliability engineers who are constantly watching what's happening, right? So now in the code side, in the application side, in the logic side, you are basically looking for this golden signals, what is going wrong, and avoiding failures that happen on the production systems. But you take the same thing on the DataOps side, you need people to keep looking for, how I am using, how the data is coming in, where is it coming from? Am I identifying any anomalies in the data that is coming in, right? So the anomaly detection, the compliance failure detection, is the data getting masked at the right time? Because now, like I said, it's no more like, I take a data and dump it and do analytics, right, with ETL. It is a real-time analytics. So the data keeps streaming. You have to keep watching what data is coming. How, is it a good data, bad data, what we discussed, right? So how do I cleanse it on the fly? How do I enrich on the fly? And how do I give the data to various consumers of the data? So that is the site reliability engineer's job, right? Or equivalent. I don't know if there is a name for that role, but it's more of we call it SRE, data for DataOps, right?
Yeah, then we also hear the term DBRE, database reliability engineer.
Yeah, DBRE, exactly. Yeah. data resiliency. So it's basically their job is to make sure, they're building a system which is resilient, which doesn't fail in production, right? So then you have the second level, uh, and that is a lot of technical things. The second level is setting up the data platform, right? So somebody who sets up, it's a more of a technical skill to look at, what are the tools that you need, what does your data pipeline look like, what are the tools that you use for cleansing, what do you do for observability of the data, what are the tools that you will use for analytics, for doing experiments, for example, and research and things like that. So that is one set of skills there. And this skill very much aligns to a particular data platform skill, like a Snowflake expert, or somebody who understands how to use Athena on AWS, to build a DataOps or a data lake on AWS. So it goes in hand with the cloud platform kind of skills, right? And then you have the data scientists, right? So the highest paid guys. These are people who actually are the people who look at, what is the domain, what is the data that you need to arrive at what kind of analytics, what kind of machine learning I need to use to arrive at this kind of prediction and identify anomalies and problems and things like that. That is the third level, right? So at a high level, this is like, these are the 3 points in the spectrum, and you will find people, in between, right? So somebody who does both of this, somebody who does a little bit of this, little bit of this kind of thing, right? And then of course you have the DevOps engineer are also important. So DevOps engineers work very closely with DataOps pipeline. In terms of some of these pipelines are also set up with Jenkins, for example, right? Or any such workflows. Ansible, for example, you could be using something like Red Hat Ansible for automation and things like that, right? So the automation skills and DevOps skills are like, are the base skills that are also required to support.
Okay. So you would say though that in the next few years, we will see more people in their LinkedIn profiles saying, I'm a DataOps engineer, or a company saying they're trying to hire, SREs or things like that?
Yeah,
okay,
definitely. Yeah. I think it's already there. I mean, just that some people call it data scientists. They generalize it by saying data scientists. And there are data engineers. There are DBAs, for example, right? So they still call it DBA, which is a traditional way of doing things. But yeah, DBAs are much more smarter right now. The current generation of DBAs know most of this stuff, what I'm talking about.
Yeah. I think and maybe it just comes down to how someone wants to identify, how like do they want to, be affiliated more with one or another. All right. Taking this a little bit further into more technical stuff, can you tell us what smart metadata is?
See can you repeat that?
What? Smart, because we talked about a little bit about metadata earlier, and a concept that we've seen a couple of times, when we had somebody else who was talking about metadata, was this thing about smart metadata.
I've heard of, we create this, one of the key tasks of DataOps is to create this meta model of the data, right? So we create a meta model of the data because we want to derive a knowledge map from that, right? So when you are creating a meta, there is a big subject called metadata management itself, right? So it's about how do you create metadata about data about data, right? So which is how do you make sense of a particular data that I'm reading is kind of coded into this meta model, right? Now the meta model is what we use for building the things like knowledge map, right? Why I need knowledge map is if I have to do natural language processing, if I have to make sense of the data that is coming. See, it's not like every time the data scientist will sit and understand the data and tell you the predictions or understand your language. So for example, this is widely used in the chat-based solutions or bots that make sense of the data, and they basically, so for example, we have one solution called Cog Assist, right? What it does is it reads through all the documents that you have, right? This could be a standard operating procedure document that you have on how to manage a particular application. it reads through the PDFs and Word documents, and it creates this meta model, right? And the knowledge map. Now you can ask the system how to restart a server, right? It would have created that meta model of the data. It doesn't give you the full document, right? It only gives a snippet of the document and says, hey, this is how you can get the data, right? This is how you restart the server, right? So to build AI-based such systems, which can, most of the chatbots use a lot of these meta models and knowledge maps to make sense of the question and answer them back. I don't know if that is what you're referring to as
No,
smart
it's
meta.
good. It's good. Because like I said, these are some of the concepts that start appearing when you have these conversations, when you start approaching these sort of spaces. And once again, is that, I think, which is why we're having this, why we have to have these conversations to get these topics out in the open, because you might hear it somewhere, you might see it in a blog, but until you actually get it in a concrete example, as you just explained, they're kind of floating on the air. So that was very good. Then going back to DataOps, from a security perspective, because I know that a lot of people find security really boring, and I understand that there are some reasons why that might be the case. I think because, some people might think that, security is like being, Neo in the Matrix and doing all this complex hacking. And then other people might think that it's kind of like being a lawyer or a policeman, and that it's, really, dry kind of work. How does security get involved if we're talking about DataOps?
Oh, I mean, see, there are three things which are very, very critical.
And particularly if we're thinking about Kubernetes, because Kubernetes presents some very specific security concerns that folks have to keep in mind.
Okay, so let me give the generic, then I'll go to Kubernetes, whatever little I know, right? So the generic answer is there are three very, very important things about data, right? One is definitely security. We talk of data in motion and data at store, right? So everything has to be end-to-end encrypted, no matter what, as long as the enterprise, you're handling any enterprise data, right? The second very important thing is the privacy, right? So the data privacy, and especially with the GDPRs and the compliances that we have around privacy now is very, very strict, right? So you need to handle, and since you are now dealing with a big data kind of a age. It's not like you have 10 tables or 20 tables. There is structured, unstructured data. Pretty much people, developers, or anybody can store anything anywhere, right? So you need to have a governance in terms of how do you ensure that the data is not stored, which is not supposed to be stored in a particular place, so that it doesn't get exposed and compromising the privacy of a particular employee or a particular client or whatever, right? The third most important thing is compliance, right? So where do you store what data? What data can be shared, not shared? What data needs to be masked when it goes from one region to another region is very, very critical, right? So especially there are norms in Europe, you cannot store data outside Europe, right? All these things become very, very critical, right? So now coming back to, so when we do the data ops architecture, we need to be careful about, it is not like data is sitting in one place. As long as I've put it in the data center, I'm happy about it. The data keeps moving. It is because it's all streaming, it's all pipeline, data pipeline. There is data moving from one source to another data lake where you're doing some analytics and things like that. So you have to be very careful in terms of how you plan the pipeline of the data. And what are your landing zones of the data? And is that landing zone very secured? Is it as per your privacy norms? Is it as per your compliance and everything, right? Now, the Kubernetes wise, one good thing about Kubernetes is it is more of the compute, right? So it's more in terms of you are writing your algorithms, or you're writing your applications, you're writing your whatever logic that you want in terms of to do analytics and whatever not is running on Kubernetes, right? As long as you have followed the Kubernetes security architecture, I have seen that it pretty much aligns to a lot of corporate security guidelines, right? But then the problem is the observability, right? So how do you know whether you're using it or not? how do you know whether you're security compliant or not, right? Now, one big problem is the open source thing, right? So a lot of enterprises freak out when you go and show open source, right? Because it might compromise their security. So how do you harden your base images? How do you make sure you have a process to harden these images? And when the images are fixed with any patches or upgrades, right? Do you have a DevOps, GitOps pipeline, which then goes, does a canary deployment across the Kubernetes cluster, right? To ensure that your whole cluster is using the same level of hardened operating system, the base image, what you create of the Docker image, right? So that, I mean, there is a lot of work that we need to do around that in terms of what is your GitOps pipeline, what is your hardening process, what kind of scanning do you do, container scanning, image scanning you do, right? What kind of security tools that you have, which keep looking for, like we use a lot of service mesh, right? So are you also tracking, the transaction going through with something like Jaeger and all that, right? So when you're doing that, what data is getting exposed in that, right? All those things become very, very critical, right? And especially when you have something like logging that you do, right? There's a lot of things that people log, and sometimes they miss out. In a debug log, I've seen people printing the URL from which the request came, for example. That could be that might have some post,
Consequences.
yeah, post parameters that you don't want to share. So such things you need a very strong observability. I think I talked a lot, right? So let me just bring it together in very simple 4 words, right? One is the security, compliance, and privacy. All 3 of them are important. And in Kubernetes world, we need to have a very strong Kubernetes platform built around it, where you have observability of not just your workloads and CPU usage, but also all the security and any compliance leakages and things like that. You need to have very, very well-defined security audit features where you're constantly auditing. You need to have a way to audit harden your images as part of your GitOps pipeline, right? So all these become very, very critical.
Good. I think we're on the same page, just because it's often, once again, because of the attraction to the shiniest, brightest thing, that security, no, we'll deal with that later. And then it never really gets in place. And like you said as well, too.
And a lot of enterprises, one last point, enterprises prefer to go for enterprise images, right? So instead of going for open source versions of it, like instead of going for Kafka, for example, they might go for Confluence, because that provides them that level of support and security promises, right? So the same thing, that's one of the things that even OpenShift claims, and all these commercial versions of the open sources, right? So they provide that for you, right?
Yep. Good. We're getting towards the end, so I can't look at those keyboards and your microphone and not talk a little bit about music. Can you tell us just about what kind of musical projects you're into, and how you can maybe connect those to the work that you do, how we can connect it to Kubernetes? We've had other musicians on before, so this is not the first time.
So it's not like a project or anything. I have a small studio. You can see that. It's been a passion since college days. So I play guitar, I play keyboard, I sing decent, right? So I compose my own stuff. Not that a lot of people listen to it, but I just still go and publish it on Spotify. So now that it's easy for me, right? So now that there is a very well-defined DevOps pipeline where I can do continuous delivery to Spotify. So I just have to check in whatever code I write with my keyboard onto. I use DistroKid to distribute my music, right? So I just go upload it, and I don't care who is listening. The money I made so far, I think in last 1 year, I released 3 tracks. I made like 80 cents, so I don't care about it. and the
Oh, go ahead,
sad
go ahead.
part is I cannot encash that 80 cents because DistroKit now says, hey, you need to have minimum $5 before you can encash. So
All right,
I'm
if you're
still
out there
waiting.
and if you're listening, please, we'll have to share the links on LinkedIn and Twitter later on
Yeah.
for your
So,
Spotify, so we can get you that $5 limit and make you a truly profitable cash in hand business.
yeah.
But I think because what you mentioned earlier is that I think one of the strongest relationships that I can find with music and programming is that there's a lot of creativity and a lot of experimentation.
Yes.
Is that I've been playing music since I was 8 years old, and obviously the music that I played when I was 8 or when I was 18 or 28 isn't the same as now that I'm 30. But it's like it's an evolutionary process. Other people
Right.
might play the exact same thing, or people look for different stuff. But I always encourage everybody, like, not everybody has to be an amazing musician, but I think everyone can kind of do something musically speaking. Like,
Yeah.
I always say, like, have you tried the ukulele? Like, it's really easy. Like, with one finger, you can do it. It's a nice way to disconnect. So that's always a fun thing to hear about as well too. That being said, we're pretty much out of time. So you did get to meet Angel when we started out, but you probably didn't know what he was doing. Gorka, can you share your screen in a second? So while we were talking, there was someone in the background lurking in the shadows who was creating an artistic representation of all the things that we were talking about. So there you go. So as you can see, yeah. So anyway, we talked about a lot of stuff. So for Angel, English is his third language. So to be keeping up with this,
Yeah, this is nice.
I think he did a pretty good job. And so we have a DataOps cocktail that's being served up.
This is nice. Very nice.
That was very, very good. Anyway,
thank you.
This was
will you be sharing this?
Of course.
Yeah.
We'll put in the Slack right now. We'll also put on Twitter and LinkedIn. It's always a nice thing because it's a nice way to get a visual representation of different concepts that are being shared and bring them, down to earth. I think there's a ton of stuff that we can take further. I just wanted, before we finish, any resources that you would recommend that you go to get knowledge about whether it's DataOps or Kubernetes or anything, just so that folks out there can have some other references?
Yeah. So for me, the daily dose I get is from InfoQ, DZone, Medium. These are like my daily reads, right? So whenever I get some free time, I just quickly go through some of them, right? And of course, YouTube is another great resource for me. Pretty much I go search anything on YouTube. You have some really great guys coming and presenting, like people from Google, people from AWS, first-hand experience of how they do these things. So these are my normal resources. And of course, I have a Linux Academy account where there are a lot of hands-on courses. So they give a sandbox to play around. I don't remember reading text, right? Unless I try it out, I cannot remember. That's my memory, right? So, so whatever it is, I need a sandbox. I need to try it out. Once I try it out, I'll remember it. So that's my approach.
Okay. All right. But I think once again, in the same way with music, trial and error, like I agree with you as well, is that, and if I don't do it, the chances of me remembering it are probably much less.
Exactly.
Anyway, that's good. But I think once again is that, things that come up a lot here, cultural factors, human factors, continuous learning. Like you said, in the past was waterfall. Now we do agile. Maybe we'll go back to waterfall. Maybe we'll be rebuilding monoliths in 10 years. Who knows? I think it's just being open-minded and being kind to yourself, and everything will be fine. Anyway, well, thank you very much for your time, AB Vijay Kumar. It was wonderful to have you.
You didn't try my full name yet, right? So that's okay.
No. Yeah, tell me again, because the first one is Abhishek.
It's
Abhishek.
Anantapur.
Oh,
Anantapur is a place in India.
Okay.
Bache is my great grandfather or whoever in the hierarchy, right? One of the base classes, right? So Anantapur Bache Vijay Kumar.
The thing is my full name is Bartholomew Dobbin Peter Farrell. So that goes quite
Wow.
long. Where I live here, actually, here people with their last names can trace it out like really, really far. Like everybody has two last names legally, two surnames. So like my partner's name is Maite Perden Anclares Asensio, but then she can take it out even further if she wants to mention the fourth, fifth, and sixth. Anyway, it's interesting. So we're gonna have to write.
It's like UUID.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Namespace.
We will have to put your full namespace when we upload the picture to Twitter and LinkedIn, and also links to your music on Spotify, so we can get you to that $5 mark. In the meantime, take care, and I really mean take care in all the senses: physical health, mental health. Be good to yourself. Play some music.
Yeah.
Try to watch videos on YouTube. Be active as much as you can. And we'll be sending lots of love and support to everybody out there in India.
Sure. Hey, thanks for this opportunity, Bart. Thanks for reaching out to me. I had good fun, though it's a little late in the night, but I didn't realize it was a lot of fun talking to you and great questions. And I am on the Slack community, so people who want to reach out can reach out to me, and we can talk on Slack. Yeah.
Yep. And we also have a music channel. We also have a music group on Slack, so we can talk there too.
Yeah. So I'll start posting anything new. Yeah.
Good. Very, very good. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.